So, today we are talking about therapy versus coaching. Do you need a therapist or do you need a coach? And at the time of this recording, there was a very public article, I believe, talking about the artist SZA who was working with a life coach when it seemed like what she really needed was a therapist based on what she was going through. And it seemed like this life coach she was working with has suggested that she do box breathing, which was not at all, it seemed like, in alignment with what it was that she actually needed. And obviously, she was suffering for some time when she really didn't have to, right? She just kind of needed the right support. And so obviously the internet went crazy, social media went crazy. I just like chuckled when I saw this because this conversation is not new to me at all. When I was a therapist, maybe when I was like fresh out of school working as a therapist, I used to look down on coaches. And I used to be like, well, they're like nothing like us. They're nowhere near, as trained as we are. And, they don't have to go through as many gates, if you will, as we have to go through. Like, we are not the same. The more I got into the work, the more I started to hire coaches, like business coaches, but also like personal development, like somatic coaches, my perspective started to shift. But it's really tough, I think, for you to speak about a profession or about a field when you have not had experience in that profession or that field as a client or as a practitioner. And now I've been on both sides of the couch, so to speak, both as a therapist and as a coach. And I think that instead of kind of getting into this like pissing contest that I think happens way too often when it comes to like therapy versus coaching, like we just need to become more educated on what they are. I think that we need to be more educated and just better consumers. And we also need to take accountability and responsibility for whatever it is that we want. In order to do that, we have to kind of come to the table minimally knowing what it is that we want. So I'm going to get more into that. I think it's important to just talk about some differences. I think that there are a lot more similarities than there are differences. And I'm just going to go ahead and say this. I think that if you are a leader of a group, of a business, of a movement, I am a very big fan and proponent that you have both a therapist and a coach, or that you are working with at least one at any given point. Not only because it is absolutely crucial as you are leading other people, you're leading movements, just the amount of pressure and just the amount of decisions you have to make and just amount of things that are on your shoulders, but because if you're not well, nothing that you do is worthwhile. That may sound a little bit harsh to some, but you can be the smartest person in the world. And I think we already have a couple of examples of people like that out in business. But, you could be the smartest person in the world. But if you are not well, if you're not emotionally, mentally well, then, your smarts kind of are compromised, like, or what you can do with your smarts is compromised. Most therapists, right, mental health therapists, right, they require a license to be able to do work. You have to take tests, you have to put in, typically thousands of hours of supervised clinical work in order to even be able to sit for an exam, to then be able to use a license. And that license is state by state license, so you can be licensed in multiple states and all of that. It is regulated. You have a license, you technically have someone to answer to, right? Like if shit goes left, like you have someone to answer to, right? Your license could be taken away, right? There's obviously legal action, like all of those things can happen in protection of a client, a therapy goer, because there's a license, because there's a governing board and all of those things. Coaching is not regulated, right? Or at least it isn't at the time of this recording. And what I mean by that is there isn't a board, let's say, that you kind of answer to. There is like ICF, which I think is the International Coaching Federation, right? And there is some oversight there, but it's nowhere near the regulation that comes with becoming a licensed mental health therapist or clinician. I just kind of wanted to start there in talking about kind of the similarities and the differences, because I think that's important, right? Anyone can really call themselves a coach, and no one is really going to come after them, right? Like anyone can do that. Anyone can go and take I don't know, like a 3 month, 6 month, even like 12 months program, and boom, you're a coach. And sure, there's like, you have to practice, have to do like your practice hours and that sort of thing. But again, it feels to me, and I am not affiliated with ICF at all. So I'm just speaking from my experience and just like what I know and what I've read. The level of oversight is just not the same, right? Kind of like what you have to put in to be able to become a coach is just not the same. It's not as rigorous, I would say, as what's required to become a therapist. And if you are looking for support, whether that's through a therapist or a coach, I think it's incredibly important for you to know how the person that you would be working with, kind of how they came to this role, right? Like what their respective field kind of requires. And again, this is all in service of being an educated consumer. That does not mean that one is better than the other, right? It's just that they're both different and they both have their kind of place in the ecosystem. So that's one piece. Then the other piece that I always like to talk about is that when I think about therapy, right? And there's like so many different modalities and so many different niches when it comes to therapy, just like coaching, right? Like when it comes to being a therapist, there really is no one size fits all in terms of like, you can't go to one therapist and that therapist be able to work with every single person, even though that is the way that we are trained and it's a disservice. But that might be a different conversation. Or maybe I'll talk about that in a little bit. Even though therapists, have like their particular ways of working, right? They have their particular training, right? Like I am a certified couples and family therapist, right? So like that is my particular training. There's just certain things that I would not, even when I was a therapist, like I would not, work with folks who, for example, dealing with like substance use, right? Because that's just outside of my wheelhouse. Even though different therapists will focus on different things, I would say that by and large, therapy and therapists are really great to get to the root cause. They're kind of like functional medicine doctors. The way that we are trained is we go to the why, right? Like we're constantly asking like why? Like why did this happen? How did you become to be this way? How did you come to this particular pattern of thinking, right? Like we're constantly asking the why. We're wanting to know the root, right? Because the thinking is if you can get to the root, like that's how the healing happens, right? The processing happens so that you can dissolve, you can metabolize, alchemize kind of what's happened so that you can change your behavior, so that you can change your thought patterns, right? You could change the way that you feel. Any therapist that you go to, depending on what their specialty is generally really good and trained at kind of helping you get to the root. And it's really important to have experience and to have supervision and to have that training, because when you think about like trauma, for example, going back to the root of certain things that are incredibly painful, like you need to be skilled at that. Otherwise, you can actually cause more harm than what the person is already kind of experiencing when they come to you. Going to the roots, right? And really being in process in that way really does require, in my opinion, a certain level of training. It requires a certain level of just like expertise, right? And that does come with time. I will say that. When I think about coaching, it's less about kind of going to the root, and it's more so about there's this thing that I want to get, that I want to achieve. There's this thing that I want to get to. Like, how am I going to get there? We're not really talking about or thinking about like what happened to you that you can't move forward. You may touch on it, right? Like you may acknowledge it, but the crux of the work is not kind of to understand or to process what hasn't been processed in the past. Generally, right? And again, there's so many, just like there are different specialties with therapists or different specialties with coaches. There are so many different types of coaches. But by and large, right, the crux of the work is if you're at A, how am I going to get you to B, right? Which is B is what you want. right? With accountability, with care, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like it can feel a lot more directive. It can feel a lot more hands-on. Not always, right? Like therapy can also feel super hands-on as well, right? But it's very much like when you think about like a basketball coach, it's like, okay, I need you to get better at this. I need you to get better at forming in this way. Like you think about performance coaching, right? Like it tends to be a little bit more tangible and actionable. Now, that said, and if you're tuning in, you're probably like, wait, like there seems to be some overlap there, and 100% there is a lot of overlap. There are tons of therapists, right, who have their coaching practices because, like it really lends itself. If you have been a therapist, right, like if you have, expertise in that area, just doing coaching just kind of makes sense. That's the skill set that you acquire as a therapist just lends itself to coaching because you already do some coaching, some form of coaching, if you want to call it that, in therapy anyway. It doesn't necessarily work the other way around. If you are a coach, it's not like you could just go ahead and do therapeutic work. Like there's just a lot more that's required. Okay. And so you will ask 20 different people who are therapists or coaches or do both, kind of what the similarities and the differences are. And you're going to get a mixed bag. Some of it is going to sound kind of like what I'm saying here. Some of it is going to sound a little bit different. Every practitioner has their own way of conceptualizing the differences. And I always tell therapy clients that I've worked with and just, anyone that I have this conversation with, especially if they kind of, play on in both sandboxes, that you need to have like your own script, if you will, like your own spiel around like how you think about each, because you need to be able to help people make the best decisions for themselves, especially if you're an entrepreneur, like you're a business owner. But like even if that's not the title or like the role that you lead with, like if you're a therapist or you're a coach, right, chances are that you are in business for yourself, and you have to be able to qualify the people that you work with. So you yourself need to be able to know, kind of like, how do you think about, therapy and coaching? Because someone can come to you that is if you're a therapist, someone can come to you that is a better fit for coaching, and vice versa, right? If you're a coach, someone can come to you and they're actually a better fit for therapy. Like you need to be able to refer them out, right? Like you need to be able to tell them, actually, I mean, I don't know if you work with integrity. Some people don't, but if you do, you should be able to say, based on kind of what you're saying here and based on what I know that I do, I think that you would be a better fit for this, right? Like, have you considered? I think that is part of our work as entrepreneurs, as small business owners, as service based providers. It's part of selling, right? Is really being able to help the person get really clear on what it is that they want to achieve. And then in dialogue and conversation, be able to say, like, I think I can help you, or no, I can't help you. Like, how do you feel about that? Right? Like, it's very much a dialogue. So we spoke about some of the similarities, right? We spoke about some of the differences, right? One is regulated, the other one isn't. The one kind of generally speaking gets you to like root cause, like gets you to the root of the problem, challenges, right? Other one is very much like, how do we get you from like A to B? I also think that, if you're having challenges with like daily functioning, yeah, like that is something that I would go to a therapist for, right? Like no ifs, ands, or buts. That is 100% how we're trained. Like we have specialized training up around that. What I really want to get into, there's like really not like, it's such nonsense, but these debates that I witness online around like which is better, which isn't. Some people are like, fuck coaches, no one should be a coach. And then other people are very much like, therapists are licensed, and kind of like the license is going to save you from people doing harm. And I really want to highlight that, because just like there's similarities and differences in therapy and coaching, they both have practitioners in them that cause harm. A license does not prevent a therapist from causing harm. You know how before I was like, it's regulated, but like not really? The reason why I say that is because once you have a license, you pay every X amount of years to use your license. And no one from the state, like no governing board, is really coming in and checking for your clinical effectiveness. No one is asking about your result. If you could pay the money to take this test and have like your terminal license, and you pay every X amount of years to keep your license, no one is really checking for you. So you could be like a terrible therapist, meaning that you're not effective at all, and be in practice for 20, 30 years. I mean, I know some people like that, and no one is really going to come for you. The only way that a therapist will get a state licensing board's attention is if they don't pay or if someone reports you to the board. Otherwise, you could fly completely under the radar. So is it really regulated? No, I think it's all for shits and giggles, really. It's for show, it's for optics. I've always been incredibly critical of this part of the mental health field because, I think it does a great disservice to the people that it's meant to serve. And so people say, well, the coaching field or the coaching, the industry is unregulated, but the mental health field is regulated, but there's an asterisk there. People do harm as therapists and people do harm as coaches. It's just, if you work with a coach, there's really isn't anyone that you could go to. Whereas, as a therapist, there is kind of that accountability piece. The thing is that most therapy seekers, like therapy goers, they don't even know that they can go and report a therapist to their state board if there's like an issue in the treatment. So again, when we think about like which one is better, which again, I don't think that one is better than the other, we just have to be very clear on what things are and the purpose that they serve. The other thing I think a lot of people don't realize is, and this goes for like both industries, is that, it's a little bit like doctors, or at least in my perception, that like, people are like, well, doctors, like there's this like God complex and they know it all and this, that, and the third. And, it's kind of like the pinnacle. But you know how like doctors make like the worst patients and they typically like don't always like go to the doctor because, they're a doctor themselves and they're just like not very good patients. The same thing happens for both therapists and coaches. There are therapists who are not in their own therapy, and I think that's wildly dangerous. Same thing with coaches, right? And I'm talking about coaches who are like in the personal transformation space, right? But I would say this of even business coaches, right? It's like, who do you go to make sure that you're good in the thing that you're helping other people through? Right? There are many therapists that don't go to therapy. There are many coaches that don't have their own coaches or not in therapy themselves. And so, again, I think that it's really about becoming like a critical thinker, really becoming a more educated, like a better consumer, and making sure that we are not making assumptions based on a title, based on a role, based on a license, because what does that really mean? I'm a very big fan of like when people, I tell this to people all the time, like all of my friends know this. Like if you're looking for a therapist, if you're looking for a coach, anyone that you're going to be working with really closely, like when you get on that first call, that consult call, you're trying to like assess fit. Like you want to ask all of the questions because you are hiring them. They, at the end of the day, kind of sort of like work for you. Like that's the way that I like to think about it. Even if you pay with insurance, for example, or whatever the case is, like they're the ones that are coming to you unless this is like a mandated situation with therapy. You are choosing to hire them even if the insurance company is paying them, but you're still making the choice to hire them. And so I think that we need to just be a little bit more empowered in that choice and ask the questions. Ask a therapist, ask a coach, like, how are you taking care of yourself? Do you go to therapy? Do you go to coaching? Like, do you have your own coach? Like, how do you take care of your inner world so that you can help me take care of mine? Like, people that I've said this to are like, what? I can do that? Well, why not? That's how you become an educated consumer. You are an educated consumer when you arrive to that consultation call with an idea of what it is that you want to work with. Don't just make the assumption that just because this person has a title of therapist or coach that they could just help you with anything that you're going through. No, you want to make sure that you're entering any type of coaching or therapeutic relationship with some idea on what it is that you want to work on, right? And even if that's I'm just going through a really tough time right now and I want to feel better. Okay, well, like, what does that actually look like so that we are not becoming disempowered and just going off of a license or going off of a title and then finding yourself in a situation like SZA, right? Because there's some assumptions that are being made. I think that outside of that, of being an educated and empowered consumer and kind of dialoguing and having a question and not assuming that just because someone has a title or has a license that they are experts and that they know everything, I think that we also need to trust our gut. Like our gut is never going to lie. It doesn't matter how big of a platform someone has. A big following does not equate to effectiveness. A degree from an Ivy League institution does not equate to effectiveness. Ask the questions, right? Really take your time and get a feel for the person that you want to work with. When it comes to therapy and coaching, it is less about which one is better. It's really about which one is going to fit for what it is that you want to work on, which is going to fit for the season of life that you are in right now, or whatever it is that you want, that you're going through, or challenge, that you're experiencing. It's about, how do I best learn? How can I resource myself best here? And am I going to get that from therapy or from coaching? Or maybe it could be another thing. The other thing that I'll say before I end here about differences between therapy and coaching is that there's a lot of red tape when it comes to therapy. There's a lot that, can and can't be done. And coaching sometimes, and I've seen a lot of therapists do this, right? Like they offer coaching because that means that they kind of can circumvent the red tape, that a lot of times is not to keep people safe, but it's nonsensical, right? It's just red tape, just for there to be red tape. And what it actually does is that it impacts the quality of care and impacts, like, ultimately the outcomes that people can achieve. Just to, like, give an example, some people offer coaching because they want to work with people that live internationally, right? Or that they live in another state, right? Because when it comes to therapy, you don't change if you change states. Like, the quality of your care doesn't change when you change states, but according to the rules of therapy, in this country, in the US, you can only serve people if you're licensed in the state where the person lives, right? Which I can understand in some ways, but in other ways, it also is a hindrance, right? Like that can become a red tape. And so some people oftentimes offer coaching to kind of get around that. Or if there are people who want to do more esoteric work, or they want to do, they really kind of want to branch away from the typical modalities that are found in therapy, but therapy, there's no place for that, or therapy kind of frowns down upon it, then some people will then go ahead and offer coaching, right? So in some ways, like, coaching can open people, practitioners, up to be a lot more creative in their work than therapy can, because there are, like, so many rules and regulations. And so, again, just to, like, wrap up here, there are a lot of differences. There are a lot more similarities, in my opinion. One is not better than the other. They're just different, and different situations call for either therapy or coaching. I think that instead of getting so wrapped up on, oh, well, someone has a license, instead of getting super wrapped up on these external things and, like, the bells and whistles and, like, the shiny object, I think that we need to trust our gut when we are sourcing people to work with. I think that we need to empower ourselves with education. We need to become more educated consumers that are thinking critically about the degrees and the trainings and the ways that people work, instead of just blindly assuming that someone is best for you in your particular situation simply because they have a role, they have a title, or there's some letters behind their names. If this incident or instance with SZA taught us anything, is that we need to get better at asking questions. And if you are a practitioner of either therapy or coaching and you're listening to this, I really, really, really want to invite you to, just practice, just speaking to someone about the differences. Like, every single therapist and coach, in my opinion, should be able to talk to anyone about the difference and why someone coming to them for a particular thing is a best fit for them versus not. That allows us practitioners, to help people better educate themselves and make better decisions for themselves. I think this is part of our work, the education piece. But I think it helps us really move the field forward, both in therapy and coaching, and also allows us to work with integrity. So that's my spiel. Again, you can ask 20 different people, and 20 different people are going to give you a different response. But I think that my perspective is important, and I wanted to share it with you. And so let me know your thoughts. Send me a DM, send me an email, podcast@josierosario.com. And yeah, I will catch y'all next week.